Hi everyone, it's Tiffany Lee, and I am here to give you another walkthrough for the animation process of this particular short, which is being done for Anime Revolution, which is a convention here in Vancouver, BC. It's their mascot, Senmei or Senkakume, and I'd like to go through the steps that I'm taking to create this animation. So I guess the very first thing that I did was to go to their website and grab all the reference material for the character design, since I didn't design it myself, but I will be adapting it to be animatable. And luckily they provided character design sheets with all the nice little details about her megaphone and costume and hair pieces, etc. So I've stuck those aside in a folder, and I had to visualize some kind of animated short for the convention. My original intent was to try to do something that was 30 seconds or shorter, and I did want to feature the venue because it's Canada Place right downtown in Vancouver, right on the waterfront. It's a very is like a landmark. So I thought it'd be appropriate to include that in the short. So I guess once I had the idea of what I wanted to do, to show a hint of Stanley Park and the shore, the sea walk on the other side, and just have her flying in, going over the water, and then landing on top of one of the masts of Canada Place, and leave it at that. So I continued doing the storyboards for that and just kind of roughed in placement of where I wanted her in each scene, and general perspective and composition. And all of these things are obviously editable as you go along, but just to get an idea. And I immediately sketched out the background very roughly, separately, to send over to my background artist, because I know I can't do everything myself. Catherine Langway was on board to help out, and of course her paintings are amazing, and there you have it. So I was able to get all the backgrounds I needed, and I had to plan ahead, since we had a complicated camera move in scene 2 where the camera kind of rotates around Senmei. So to simulate that, we made a repeatable cloud background, so I can pretend that the camera is actually going around the character when it's not actually doing that. But anyway, right, so once I had all those backgrounds and layouts done, I started my animatic. So that's where I'm kind of planning out the timing of the shot. So I just take my storyboard panels, cut them all out, and put them together roughly. And typically the storyboard will show all the major movements that are happening. So they can be used as keyframes, more or less. So that's what I did. I kind of dropped them into my software and used them as keyframes. So first of all, I cleaned up those shots, since I liked a lot of the poses, and spaced them out in my timeline according to how I liked it in the animatic. And then we started on the rough animation. The first thing I did, actually I started on doing some in-betweens before I decided to start actually recording this. So you can see in the timeline there's a lot of in-betweens already done. I did them on several different layers. Don't get me started on how and why that happened, but anyway, I'm just scrolling through it to see if I need to adjust any timing and etc. And I just want to take a moment to pause here. Now, most of you who are probably getting into animation already know about this, but the typical frame rate for animation is 24 frames per second. And in most animation, that equals 12 drawings per second. Each drawing would be held for 2 frames. That's very, well, general, the average. Oftentimes we extend holds for several frames, or else add one frame per drawing, and that's typically used for like hardcore action where things are moving so fast you need to trick the eye. So sometimes you can't get away with it, and some of the information gets lost if you're only stuck on twos. So sometimes we'll do ones in those kind of situations. Now, classical Disney tends to do entirely on ones, and that's why it's so fluid and so buttery. But broadcast animation, particularly Japanese animation, is usually done on threes or fours, and that's the average for them. It saves on production costs. I mean, when you're drawing a complex character design over and over again, it takes a lot longer than a more simplified, classical Disney style character, which is designed to be able to draw very quickly in succession. So that's why a lot of cartoon characters are very simplified. It just makes it faster to produce, and essentially it's cheaper. All right, so continuing on, I've done all these in-betweens on twos, and then I've gone back to readjust timing, so some sections are on ones. So I'm just checking if I need to adjust any sections, like sometimes the hair is flipping the wrong direction, or I might have mixed up the frame before and after and ended up animating something backwards, going in backwards motion, which is kind of, yeah, it happens quite a lot to me. I get confused. But yeah, it requires a lot of flipping back and forth so that you are keeping track of what you're doing and where you are in the whole project. Okay, so moving into some in-betweening. Like, a lot of this is literally just doing exactly halfway between your first frame and your second frame. And I like to do this by the section. So if I have a big gap between keyframes, I'll just go somewhere down the middle, or find a spot. Like if I wanted it to become slower in the front and faster towards the second keyframe, then I would place my in-between, my breakdown frame, closer towards the end. So that way there are more frames in the beginning than towards the end, and that'll make it faster towards the end and slower towards the beginning. And I just find it a little more easy to do these where it's exactly halfway between. So that's usually where I start. However, that usually makes for very uninteresting motion. And to make it more realistic and just more interesting to look at, often you need to stagger your movements. So you have to favor one keyframe over the other. And that just means making your breakdown or in-between frame closer to either the first frame or the last frame. I know this is getting kind of technical. But in any case, this is what I spent most of my time doing. And I was missing quite a few motions, and halfway through in-betweening, I decided I wanted to add more facial expressions and really bring out the happy personality of this character and playful personality. And that's how I ended up doing a whole bunch of new keyframes as I went along, which extended the length of the shot. So you'll notice I'm practically doing just referencing the red and the green. So in harmony, the green represents the shot that's coming up, the future, and the red represents the past or the previous keyframe. And that's sometimes I get mixed up between the two, but don't even ask me. After you stare at it for so long, it just kind of melds together. So these are good reference points. And I do it one detail at a time, like I'll do the head or the eyes, or just look at the nose in the frame ahead and the frame behind and do that right in between. And things like hair and secondary motion, that's even more complicated. Sometimes I leave that for the last thing and just concentrate on the solid parts like the body, and then come back and worry about the clothes and the hair, since those often move independently and are not always perfectly in between. Otherwise, it'll just look very stiff and wrong. I guess I can talk about that wave principle in another tutorial somewhere down the line. And that will apply to any kind of hair or clothing, anything that moves fluidly or, independently of something solid. And you'll notice later on, as we get down towards her full body, where her full body is being seen, that I start by making very rough motion lines first, like the S curve, to decide where her body is turning or where her body position will go to, and loosely just drop in those geometric shapes to represent arms and legs and body. And from there, of course, I have to tweak it a bit and find the best position. And the best way to test it is just scrub through, front and back. Scrub through your frames often so that you can test the movements and make your adjustments accordingly. In old school traditional style on paper, you'd probably see me flipping pages a hell of a lot more. But with the digital versions, I'm able to see all the frames at the same time. So it's a little, it has its pros and cons. I find that flipping paper is just kind of second nature to me now, since I did quite a lot of that back in the day. All right, so moving on. Again, I added quite a lot of those new keyframes. And sometimes when there is a big jump in between your first and second keyframe, it does make it really challenging to find the right placement for your breakdown. So you'll probably see that I do a lot of redrawing and completely killing it and starting over because the motion just was not working for me. And, a lot of this is trial and error. I mean, how do you know how it's going to look until you try it? But I spend a lot of time thinking about it beforehand and imagining it and trying to pre-visualize before I go to draw something. And that's not to say that I have an easy time drawing what's in my head to paper, because that's totally not the case. I have a hard time doing that too. Sometimes my hands just don't want to do what's what I visualize. But I try my best. I'm sure all of us do try. And it does take a lot of time and patience and determination to make, to stick with it. And often I will take each segment of frames and only do the breakdowns first. And then I'll go back and fill in the rest of the in-betweens if I feel like the movement's working for me. And then every so often I'll go back and play the whole thing through at real time and also scrub it slowly. Scrubbing just means dragging the arrow across the timeline. And then I can control the speed and check all the pieces. So when I'm scrubbing, I usually focus on a certain area at a time. For example, I'll stare at her feet while I scrub through one time, or I'll stare at her hands the next time, and I'll stare at her facial features the time after that. So I can pick up any discrepancies, things that aren't flowing into one another properly, and make the proper adjustments. So this is very meticulous, and it is extremely time consuming, but in the end I think it's worth it to see a character come to life. And having this many in-betweens should create that fluid motion. And if you want to make it super buttery, you can go in and do these on ones if you really want to. Often I don't find it's necessary. But for example, when this character bends forward and then flips her head back and goes into her final landing position, I found that motion was very fast and it felt like it wasn't smooth enough, and I added a couple of ones in there to make it look better. So I could add a couple of poses that go by so quickly that you can't technically pick it up, but your eye reads it anyway. And I did decide to focus a lot on her expressions in this particular short, since I haven't had the opportunity to do that in a lot of the other animations I've done lately, since a lot of them were just trailer kind of things and or shorts that had very strict guidelines. So this one I had quite a bit of freedom to do, of course. This mascot hasn't been drawn in 2D animation before, and there is a 3D version, and I found, oh, that was pretty good, but there's nothing quite like 2D animation. And decided to do that as a favor to the chairman, who was very kind to me and helps me out a lot whenever I'm participating with the convention. All right, so you'll also see that I tweak body parts and body angles using the digital tools quite a lot. And I do use motion arcs to help plan my motion movements between keyframes. So if you see this random line, curved line, that's what it is. And a lot of this again is pre-visualization. So you just kind of imagine the scene playing out in your head and try to decide how naturally to move arm A to arm position B. And a lot of times as an animator, we'll have a mirror handy and try to perform the motion ourselves for reference so we can understand it and then draw it. And that's particularly true for expressions. And if you need to, don't be ashamed to look up references on YouTube or wherever. Because if there's something you haven't animated before and never thought about animating before, there's no shame in using references to help you understand it and recreate it in a 2D environment. Now the first round I did towards the end of her landing here, I wanted it to be kind of Sailor Moon-y, where she just kind of poofs out into her final pose. So I tried making her do a tightened jump and then a tightened pose, and it just wasn't panning out for me. So I decided to just straight in between it and save myself some headaches. And I can't say I regret that decision, so we stuck with that and finished up the rest of the poses. And I also discovered that myself, as an animator, having had to deal with animation in the West, we always tend to do very exaggerated posing in our animation. And the more I think about anime and particularly Miyazaki films, they really try to do more subtle, realistic animation. And that's what that little hop at the very end of this clip was dedicated to. I really wanted to experiment with that and see if I could achieve it rather than all these super exaggerated huge poses that are very different from keyframe A to keyframe B. And I guess it worked out pretty well. That, and I'm working on an upcoming project, starting work on it very soon. So I also wanted to use that as a demonstration for them. And I'll tell you more about that project coming up soon. Okay, so like I said, most of this is trial and error, and once you get your keyframes in there and your breakdowns in there, it makes it a little easier to do your actual in-betweens. And you'll notice I do them very, very sketchy and loose, and I don't bother too much with the details. I can come back and worry about that later. I guess that's what makes cleanup take a little longer for me. But I find that making sure that the motion and the movements and the proportions and body parts moving, I think that's a little more priority at this stage. And sometimes hair I'll leave until the last minute, particularly this character has a really long ass ponytail, and it kind of gets in the way and goes in front of the body and obscures things. So it's, if I wasn't doing a demonstration myself, I would have left that to last, just on the body and her head and her arms and everything else, and then come back to the hair later. So it wouldn't matter if it goes on top of her body. I wouldn't have to worry about, blocking it in advance. But I ended up doing it all at once anyway, and that gave me some issues later because when I went to when I had to make changes to posing, the hair kind of got in the way, so that was really inconvenient. And also when I had to go and make adjustments to the hair motion, the body was not there, like it was missing, so that caused me more work. Like even in this case, it wouldn't be a bad idea to do the hair on a separate layer, and then you could leave it on a separate layer when you do cleanup, or you can combine it onto the same clean layer later on. Whatever floats your boat. So yeah, just things to think about for animation. It's a lot more complicated than than a lot of people make it out to be. The pros sure make it look easy. And by pros, I mean like the big time Disney animators like Glenn Keane and I don't know, like Don Bluth, guys like that. It's like they put pencil to paper and magic happens. I don't know. I don't feel like I can hold a flame to those guys, but hopefully someday. So I guess aside from pre-visualization, again, a lot of this is just really trial and error. And I just happen to be able to have this kind of intuition about where things should be moving, I guess. So I don't have to redraw stuff a heck of a lot, I guess, compared to some other people might have issues with. I don't know, I guess I overthink things a lot. Then it helps to actually do the motion yourself to understand where things are going. And that's part of the visualization process, I guess. Now, even though it's a 2D animation, you have to understand how things move in 3D space in order to draw it. And yeah, so I do a lot of scrubbing, a lot of flipping between keyframes, and focusing on those spots that I mentioned earlier, like just the feet or just the hands or just the hips. And every little detail is important. So if a hand is not perfectly flowing from one to the other, then it can really throw off the entire scene, because your eye will catch that little blip and you'll just feel like something is wrong, something's off. And we want to try to avoid that with the viewers, even though the viewer may not understand why that's happening. It will give them a bad feeling. So, yeah. All right, so the very ending here, she's supposed to be holding her megaphone up, but I haven't drawn it in yet, so just excuse that for now. Since her body's not moving, but her hair and her tie will be kind of waving in the wind, I've decided to separate it onto a different layer. That also saves me redrawing the body, over and over again when it's not changing. If it's only the hair. Big time saver. And because I have her bangs on top of her head, but her ponytail is kind of behind her body, I put that on separate layers as well. So her bangs are on a layer above her body and her ponytail's behind her body. once we fill that in with colors, they will, it won't be distinguishable. Yay for cycles. All right, so that's concludes this session. And again, if you have any questions at all about the process, if I've forgotten anything, just let me know, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for checking out my tutorial, or walkthrough, more accurately. And best of luck with all your own projects, and I hope this helps you with your own animations, or it can even help with just your own illustrations and comic planning. It's pretty versatile. Everything crosses over into everything else, so hopefully something in here was helpful for you. All right, thank you so much again for all your support on Patreon. For those of you not on my Patreon, please consider contributing and becoming a supporter. And all the proceeds will go towards the production of my own animated pilot episode, Shadow Magic. We're just about finished with the voiceover recording, and we'll be going back to finishing up the storyboards and putting together an animatic timed with our voice actors. And everything right now will be going, all the funds will be going towards producing the background art and covering all of our voice actor expenses. I think we've accomplished that in the last few months. Thank you, everyone. And of course, becoming a patron also means that you'll get all the exclusive content that's not shown on my Facebook pages or Twitter or Tumblr or whatever. It's exclusively for patrons, so things like work in progress shots, sneak peeks behind the scenes on current projects, and things that are unannounced. You'll hear it first, and you'll see it first. All right, thank you so much. Have an awesome day. Until next time.